Okay guys, it's finally time to learn how to play the king's Indian defense against the 4-pawn attack. Up to this point in the course, we learned how to play it against the classical, we learned how to play it against the Samish, against the London, even against this variation where the white pieces could do h3 followed by g4. Even when they just send the h-pawn all the way up, we talked about the fianchetto variation. Then we took a break, we talked about endgames, we talked about some middle game ideas that you could use in the king's Indian defense. So if you haven't gone over it, feel free to go over it because you might need it in lessons like this one. Now, this time we're going to do things a little bit different because first I'm going to let you peek into my opening repertoire. Then I'm going to show you some games that I have played lately using this variation. And lastly, we're going to go over some improvements that we need to do to those lines that I have in my opening repertoire. So let's get to it. First things first, what you have in front of you guys is my very first opening repertoire. When I first started to take openings seriously, this was my main opening as a white pieces. Notice that it is the 4-knight opening, Scotch variation with d4. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, then the other knight comes out for white and black, and then pawn to d4. And you can see that I even had some other nodes on the side. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because even though it has nothing to do with the king's Indian defense, when we go now to this other page where I have my nodes on the 4-pawn attack, you can see guys that I only had a little bit of information regarding that variation. Now I'm gonna put this here next to the board and we're going to actually use only this for our lesson because this is all I had for many years. When I first learned how to play the king's Indian defense, guys, this is all I had on the 4-pawn attack. And I got very nice games with it. I had a very good record with it. I still have it because if you understand the main ideas, which is what I need from you, you're going to be able to get off the opening safely and outplay your opponents in the middle and end game. This is the plan. We're going to go over this variation here. I'm going to show you some games where even though my opponent didn't do what's here, I was able to use the same ideas and make it work. And finally, we're going to go over some improvements that we need to do to this because this is really old. So anyways, let's get to it. After f4, we're going to castle. And this is a very good moment for me to tell you this. If you haven't heard it, you're going to hear it now. The 4-pawn attack has a very bad reputation. It looks a lot like the Austrian attack in the Pyrrhics, and we've gone over it before, but it is not as good. And the main reason is this pawn on c4, guys. When you have 4 pawns pushed like that in the center, more than anything, it looks intimidating, but more than anything, that's a huge liability for the white pieces. It's hard to keep them safe, to keep them working together. So all that we're going to do as the black pieces is mine it. We're going to try to disrupt that center, and then the white pieces will have a hard time keeping everything together, as you're going to see. Now, the best proof that I can give you about this, about the fact that this center or this variation is not that strong, is the following. There's one game that I'm going to leave it in the description or the comments for this lesson, where Bobby Fischer was playing as the black pieces, and this is how the game went. After e4, he just castled. Notice that he did not even do d6, preventing that e5. The reason being, guys, is that if the white pieces did e5, like happened in that game, well, they're already weakening that center. So Bobby Fischer in that game did 98, then f4. Look, this is like the 4-pawn attack, but they just did e5 before, right? So then Bobby Fischer did d6, and after bishop e3, pawn to c5. And you're gonna see how immediately he starts putting pressure on that center. I'm not going to go over, guys, because we're not gonna be playing this variation like that. However, it is extremely important that you go over that game. Like I've told you before, even if you don't play certain variations, any information that you can get is going to help you become a better king's Indian defense player, but more importantly, a better chess player in general. So why am I not showing you this? Well, when we play against this variation, we're going to do d6, f4, we're going to castle, very natural, and now the main continuation for white is knight f3. Now, if they did e5, guys, we're going to do knight f to d7. So in Bobby Fischer's game, his knight is on e8, we're going to have it on d7. So if they just continue like this, we're going to do like we learned in our lesson against the Austrian attack. Even if you don't play the Pyrrhics, feel free, guys, to go over those lessons, because as you should know by now, if you've been following this course, there are many ideas from one opening that you could use in the other. So I think the Austrian attack is less than, I want to say, 73, 74. But you're going to see how when the white pieces do e5, many times you just go knight f to d7, followed by c5. And at this moment, we're already weakening the center. If they take, well, we take on e5, and look, double pawns that we could take anytime. If they take back, we have the knight and the bishop, so we could collect as well. And this is going to be a very comfortable game for the black pieces. From here, queens could be traded. After this is resolved in the center, you could do knight c6, develop the bishop, and again, you have a very comfortable game. You even have a passed pawn, guys, a passed pawn that could be protected. So anyways, I'm gonna go back. I'm not going to spend too much time on this early push. You should know, if you go over that lesson over the Austrian, the Pirks versus the Austrian, if you look at the game that Bobby Fischer played, you should be fine. And look, not many people played the 4-pawn attack, and among those players, almost no one is going to play this early e5. And if some people do it, by the end of this lesson, you're going to be fine dealing with it. Now, let's focus on knight f3. Guys, after knight f3, the main line, this is what you're going to see in many encyclopedias, in many books, is c5. This is the same move that we do against the Austrian attack. However, don't get it mixed up, because I myself, as you can see on my old notes, I don't like to do c5. I like to do knight a6. Now guys, the coolest thing about this is that it's going to help you remember it. It is going to help you keep things consistent. If you remember our lesson on the classical variation, when they did, let me go back, knight f3, castle, bishop e2, I recommended also knight a6. So now to me, it is going to be almost the same thing. When they castled, if you remember, we're going to do e5. Well, guess what? When we play the 4-pawn attack, we're going to do castle, knight f3, knight a6, like in the classical, and after bishop e2, we're going to do e5, the same thing. Now, this looks a little bit uncomfortable for black, because they have so many pieces attacking e5, but you're going to see how it makes a lot of sense. And in my experience, the white pieces just don't know how to handle it. So you're going to let me know when you play yourself, but you're going to see you're going to have very nice games with this variation. Now guys, within this variation, you need to know how to play against bishop e2. You need to know how to play when they do bishop d3. Bishop d3 offers more support to e4, so it could be a little bit different when it comes to some of the tricks that we have in this variation. You just need to keep it in mind. So by the end of this lesson, you need to know how to play against this early e5 without the knight on f3, and against knight f3. Within this knight f3, you need to know how to play against bishop e2 and bishop d3. So make sure that you have that under control. Now, if we look at my notations, we have pawn to e5, and from here, after pawn takes, we're going to take back with the pawn, and now we have to know what to do if pawn takes on e5, knight takes on e5, or if they just ignore it and they do pawn d5, which in my opinion is the best continuation. Now, if they just take here, pretty bad move, double pawns, isolated, so we could do something like this, followed by knight to g4. We're ready to take on e5, and we're going to leave them with an isolated pawn on e4. Even if they do something like bishop f4, we could just do rook e8, and we're going to take that pawn. Guys, moves like knight d5, they're not a big deal to us, because just like we learned in our lesson against the classical, this knight here is protecting c7. So we could do c6, the knight has to leave, and then we pick up on e5. So knight takes, and we should be fine. You could even think of bringing this knight over. There's no hurry to capture on e5. Now, if instead after c6 they did something like knight f6, they're even losing material, guys. It's not only about the weak pawns, it is also about the fact that the king is in the center. So now we could do bishop takes f6, and when the pawn takes, we don't have to capture here right away. We could do rook e4 with a fork. So as you can see, it is really uncomfortable for the white pieces to get into these positions. Now let's go back, and let's say that instead of taking on e5 with the pawn, let's say that they take with the knight. Well, here there's one move that you have to remember. The center is still very nice, so we're going to mine it. We're going to strike it with c5. Guys, if they take, needless to say that this center is again very ugly, so we could just take, knight captures on c5, and we're putting pressure on that isolated pawn. King is still in the center, so we could do rook e8. Plus, don't forget, when this knight is here by itself, we could always do this discovered attack. So many things happening for the black pieces here. We have so many nice themes to use. Now, what if instead when we do c5, what if they do pawn to d5? Well, knight's hanging, same idea. We have a discovered attack. So you could do knight takes pawn, and you're going to see when I show you one of my games that even though I don't get a position exactly like this, I remembered the ideas and I was able to use it. So knight e4, if they take, you could just collect on e5, you're going to be fine, or you could do queen h4. Another idea that I picked it from these lines that I have, my notes, and I used it in different positions. So I could do this, followed by queen takes on e4, so something like this. Or if they did knight g3, then I take. Again, guys, these are just ideas. You're going to use them as you please. Now, let me go back. Perfect center, I'm going to do c5. What they could do here is bishop e3, bringing more pieces to support the center. Now, what you should do here, guys, and this is going to get very exciting for blacks, this is how you're going to continue. You're going to continue with knight to b4, look at that knight, aiming at c2. If they did a bad move, something like this, you could do c takes d4. If bishop takes, now you could do this very nice move. Queen takes bishop, sacrificing it, because the knight is going to pick up after with a fork. So king moves and we just collect on d4. So anyways, what typically happens here, or what most people might do, guys, after knight b4, they could do rook c1, or they could do castling. If they castle, fine, I'm going to take on d4, bishop takes, and again, knight c2. This time we cannot do this because we don't have the check, so we could change the move order. So knight c2, fork, and if the queen takes, then we pick up on d4, and then we pick up on e5. Again, the black pieces are the ones playing around with all of these tactical themes. So let me go back. Let's say that instead of castling, they go rook c1. Now here, guys, there's a very powerful move again for the black pieces, which is knight to g4. And now if they just go bishop takes, knight takes, then the bishop and the queen can help us take on d4 with a very nice fork. And again, we get the material back and we leave the white pieces with a pretty bad situation in the center. So guys, I'm gonna go back. I know this has been a lot, so I trust that you're here on this chess and you're using learn, study, and you can create your studies. That way you can save everything that we're learning right here. If you're not familiar with this, go back to the lessons we've had on the King's Indian defense, especially the one I think with the classical, where we went over how to save this for you to access it in the future. So anyways, I'm going to go back. Up to this point, we have learned what to do up to this. We're going to do knight a6. So our king is castled, knight a6, followed by striking with e5. Pawn takes. This move, we know what to do. We capture queens, followed by knight g4. And so something like this. And then we have two pieces attacking e5. If instead of taking there, they just take with the knight, we have to strike that perfect center with c5, and we make it unstable again. Taking here, they're not gonna do it. Pushing on d5, remember the tactic, we take on e4. So guys, now we are left with what to do if instead of taking on e5 with the pawn or the knight, what if they just push? They're going to ignore it, they're going to try to keep it solid. Well, immediately, we should be familiar after so many lessons on the King's Indian defense. We know that when they push the d pawn, they create weaknesses, c5. So we're going to do knight to c5, as you can see in my notes. And then in my notes, I have bishop g5 as the best continuation for white. But if they did something like queen c2, this is very important. A lot of people are going to do queen c2 or something similar. And you're going to see it in one of the games that I'm going to show you next. Here, guys, you have this tactic. Knight takes, and now bishop f5. So that knight is pinned, we're going to pick it up, or if they did something like bishop d3, defending it, breaking the pin, now we take, bishop takes, and then f5. The thematic f5 move in the King's Indian defense, if they go back, then we have this fork, but I think it's even stronger if we do check first and only then we fork. So when the queen moves, we're going to take on f3. The rook or the queen could come to attack the king, not only through the e file. Remember that the queen could go to h4 since the f pawn is not there anymore. So keep this in mind. Again, people might just do something like, let me go back. Instead of queen c2, they might do bishop g5, which is fine. You're just going to go with h6. If bishop takes, we take back. And guys, we just play chess from here. So you know, you're familiar. Last lesson, we talked about this pawn formation. So you might just do a5 to secure the knight. You might do queen e7, followed by f5. You just play chess. And you're going to see this later in the lesson. But up to this point, guys, we should know what to do whenever they do bishop e2. The moment you see that bishop e2, we strike with e5. And after they take, we know what to do if they just take, really bad. We know what to do if they take on e5. We're just going to mine the center with c5. We know what to do if they push. So knight to c5, and you're going to be fine. Now, guys, the only other thing or something that you're not going to see in my notes is what if they did, let me go all the way back. So 4-pawn attack, we're going to castle, knight f3, knight a6. What if they did, instead of bishop e2, bishop d3? Well, for many years, guys, it didn't make a difference to me. I just treated it the same way I treated bishop e2. I would just do e5 with the same ideas. So if they take, I take back. Now, if they take here, we don't even have to worry about c5. This guy's hanging. So good thing about the bishop is that it's bringing more support to e4 for the white pieces, but it's also blocking the queen. So taking with the knight doesn't work. We just capture on d4. If instead they take over here, well, we have the same ideas. We could do knight g4, trying to pick up on e5. They're going to be left with an isolated pawn. Very comfortable position for the black pieces. Now, at the risk of getting you confused, guys, let me mention this. If you are a little bit more creative, if you're really comfortable with these positions, you might even think of, you know what, I'm not going to move the knight. Let me take advantage of the c5 square. So if they take, now we could do knight d3 with check, and only then we capture on f6. The only reason why I mentioned this is for you to see how there are always opportunities for the black pieces to create trouble. So let me go back and let's talk about them just pushing to d5. And this is the line that could get a little bit difficult for you guys here. You're gonna see in one of my games that I continue with bishop g4. And I play it when I play online, when I play blitz, it continues to offer me those tricks, those complicated positions. But in a real game, I'll play more quietly, guys. I'll probably just do knight c5, trying to put my queen on e7, a5 to secure c5. All of these moves are going to be a little bit quieter and a little bit more solid for the black pieces. This is something that I wanted to mention it because I don't want to tell you, you know what, just do bishop g4 and fight for those tricks, because when you play someone stronger, they're going to know what to do. And you have to be aware that there are better continuations when the bishop is on d3. Now, it doesn't mean that if you do bishop g4, you're going to get in trouble. It's just that it is a little bit better, a little bit more accurate if we did something like knight c5, queen e7 again, and pawn a5. Ideas that you guys should know by now. So just play chess. This is what I used to do. I knew exactly what you know up to now. We've gone over the other variations. Many of you have told me that you've been playing it. So I had some experience. I just play chess. Again, if you look at this pawn formation, you know that one of the plans is keep the knight on c5, and also we want to make f5 work. And you're going to see that later. Now, up to this point, we went over my variations. I think I already told you the improvement that I was going to tell you at the end. So we're only left with reviewing some of the games that I had for you guys. All right, first game. This game was a draw, even though I got a very nice position in the opening. I made some silly mistakes later and I got in trouble. Now, look at this. In this game, guys, my opponent did the 4-pawn attack. I castled, knight f3, knight a6. Then they just went bishop e2 and I stroked the center. So pawn to e5, f takes, pawn takes, and then after d5, you see, they did not take on e5 because of the things that we just covered. Now, after d5, what do? Knight goes to c5 automatically. Queen to c2, defending that pawn, And now the tactic that we had talked about, guys. So what did I do? Well, I'm very familiar with this idea of capturing on e4. So knight took on e4, knight took on e4, and now one of the things that comes to mind is queen h4, but I can't. So what was the other resource? Well, bishop f5, pinning it. If bishop d3, well, we could do this, remember? Followed by f5, e4. Well, my opponent did something that we didn't cover before, but now we're covering it. He did knight f to d2. So I just took, he took, and now queen h4. You see, guys, these ideas that I learned, I used them here now. In my notes, I only had what to do if they had done bishop d3, but we know enough tactics to figure this out. And we also saw these ideas of queen h4 in my notes. So anyways, after queen h4, my opponent just did king f1. I took with the bishop because I do not want to trade queens. His king is not that safe. I want to attack it, so I want my most powerful piece to stay on the game. So up to this position, you can see how everything that we learned, all of our opening preparation, took me to a superior middle game. I'm going to leave it here, guys, because I want to move on to the next games that I want to show you, but feel free to do what you've been doing so far. Set this position against the engine. You could do it on this chess for free and see if you can capitalize, see if you can close this game. If you don't feel like playing it against the strongest level, well, set it to the level that you typically play with. Or if you have a friend, feel free to set up this position and see if you can close this game against a friend. Here's the second game that I want to show you guys. This time I was able to close it. So let me just go all the way back here to d4. Then we get to the position where my opponent did the 4-pawn attack. Then knight f3, knight a6, bishop d3 again. So I strike the center. And after they take, they did d5. So knight c5 immediately. This time after knight c5, they did bishop c2. I'm not intending to take that bishop anyways, but they did it fine. And now bishop g4. They castled, and once again, it made sense, guys. The bishop is pinning the knight, so it made sense for me to sacrifice on e4 because I know that I'm going to do f5 with the tempo on whatever piece takes here. Well, not whatever piece, on the bishop. If they take with the knight, I'm not going to just do f5 because they could take another knight. So I have to take, make sure that the bishop comes in, and this is what happened in the game. Now that the bishop is here, I do f5 with the tempo, and when they go back, I do e4. And that's exactly what happened in the game. h3, and now I'm going to keep the pin. So I went bishop h5, no rush to take on f3, g4. And now my question to you is the following. If you were playing this game, if you got to this position, how would you continue? Take a few moments, pause the video if you need to, and think of the next move that you would do. Well, guys, the reason why I'm asking this is because as I was reviewing this game, I activated the chess.com evaluation and they highlighted my next move, pawn takes g4, as a brilliant move. I don't get this often, but this one happens to be a very nice move. And if you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. We're taking on g4. It is true that they could just move the knight out of the way, but when we take again, we have that king completely exposed. We did a discovered on the queen. We got our pawn to h3 with the tempo. We have to be winning here. Again, we have the initiative. Their king is exposed. Same patterns that we have seen before. Then they moved the knight. So they left my bishop sort of blind there. But now after g takes h3, I'm hitting that queen. That king is completely exposed. And look at this pawn on h3. So here they just traded rooks. I took back with the queen. Queen e1, and guys, you should be familiar with this position. I put this in the community tab. At this point I did check from g7 to a different diagonal, and after bishop e3, again I put this in the community tab. I asked you what would you do, and my move, and many of you guys found this move, was queen f4. There is a pin, so now the queen is coming over to f4 to put more pressure on it. I'm attacking the knight. So at this point my opponent resigned. If they had taken the bishop, well, I'm going to probably do queen g5 check. If the king comes to any of these squares, checkmate. If the king comes to f2, well, the rook comes over. The rook that was doing nothing is going to be involved. I think the only move here is to block with the bishop, and then that's going to be checkmate. So again, guys, all of these simple ideas, only a little bit of information to remember, is going to allow you to get comfortable positions in the middle game. If your opponent is not familiar, well, you could get these fun positions and combinations. Now, the last thing that I wanted to do, I wanted to come back here to Lichess, and I wanted to activate this Fischer. You guys should be familiar with it. So we have here the theoretical moves, and I'm going to just do castles, then knight f3, knight a6. By now, guys, you should know the drill. You should know what to do. Bishop d3, pawn e5, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn to d5. Now, at this point, I want you guys to pay attention to the theory, but down here, it is going to show you games. Now, you have one game here by Dubov, where he has the white pieces, and the game was a draw, so you could look into that game. You could look into this game, another two very strong players. Look at this. These are super GMs, and the black pieces won. So if I look into this one, for instance, you see after pawn to d5, knight c5 happened, bishop g5, and it is marked as a doubtful move. So after bishop g5, we have h6, the bishop goes back, g5, get out of here, and after queen e7, protecting that knight, we have bishop c2, knight g4, going after the good bishop. Look, pawns in the center, especially the most forward pawn, is the same color as this bishop. That's the bad bishop. This one has a very good scope. We're going after it. So bishop g1, look, they prefer to put the bishop on a very passive square, preventing the white pieces from castling, but they really want to keep that bishop. Now, pawn to f5, remember, look, pawn formation, we talked about this last lesson. We're going to strike with f5. Then knight to d2, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop takes, and knight f6. Guys, I'm going to leave it here. I just wanted you to see how, even at the top level, they play these variations, and they're going to follow the same ideas. If you have been paying attention to this course, the lessons that we have had, none of these moves, none of these ideas should be unfamiliar to you. Like always, we're going to talk in the comments, but don't forget, reviewing games, even if they have nothing to do with these lines that you're going to be playing, it is extremely important because you're going to be learning chess in general. So again, I'll talk to you in the comments, and I'll see you guys in our next lesson.